someone who had a better grasp on the ethics of this question. So we have invited Christian Bruger to the program. He is a senior fellow of ethics and director of the Fellows Program at the Culture of Life Foundation in Washington, D.C., and he's also the J. Francis Cardinal Stafford Professor of Moral Theology at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver, Colorado. He has master's degrees in moral theology and moral philosophy from Seton Hall, Harvard, and Oxford universities, and received his PhD in Christian ethics from Oxford in 2000. He's published over 200 articles in scholarly and popular periodicals. So, Christian Bruger, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me to be on.
I found out about you through an article I saw published in the National Catholic Register about 3 years ago. You were quoted in that article, and the article is titled "To Puff or Not to Puff." We'll make sure that gets posted on our show website. But I guess, Christian, there are many places that we could start our discussion here today. I guess, first of all, more and more states, as we were talking about a minute ago, are legalizing the recreational use of marijuana, even though that contradicts, if I understand it right, that contradicts federal law, which is still has a ban on it. So how are we to understand the actions of these individual states in light of the position that is still held by the federal government?
Well, I live in Colorado, and we have pushed through a legalization bill that permits the possession up to a relatively small amount of marijuana. So we've done a lot of thinking about it, but it was very clearly a challenge to federal law. Obama made it clear that his Justice Department has more important things to do than to be prosecuting criminals who are arrested with small amounts of marijuana, and there hasn't been any significant federal response, although there certainly could be if we got in another president who believed this was a bad thing for the common good. There could be a strong federal response to the Colorado law, and eventually it would lead to a Supreme Court challenge, which I think would be a good thing.
Let me ask you this, Christian. Thank you so much for being with us, and we really, like Jerry said, wanted to have an expert on, and you are, so that is perfect. And what about this idea? I had shared that I think over half of the United States, the states have legalized it for medical use. What are we to make of that? Is that something that is going to be? I mean, is it going to go widespread or across the whole United States? Is it something that we should just accept because it's part of the medical? The help for people, the support for people who have really serious issues. What does the church think of that? I mean, is that okay?
Well, because the church has not published any official statement on the issue of legalization.
Uh-oh.
Oh, we just lost our guest.
And I wanted to hear that answer.
Well, I suspect that we will get to hear that answer by our guest, Christian Bruger, who, again, he's a moral theologian, and he teaches, he's on the staff. He's actually the J. Francis Cardinal Stafford Professor of Moral Theology at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver, Colorado. So he's right there, kind of in ground zero, one of the earliest states to legalize recreational use of marijuana. Mm-hmm. So if you'd like to join us here on the program today, we got Marie and Lisa, whose calls have been screened already, and other lines are open at 1-800-585-9396. I mentioned earlier we did get some Facebook activity from people who do consume small amounts of marijuana for medical purposes. And if that is you, dear listener, if you have to, say, smoke marijuana because no other medications will work for you, we'd love to hear from you, your experience with that. Maybe you feel strongly that in no case should marijuana be legalized. It is a natural plant. It grows out of the earth, so what are we to make of that?
Right.
1-800-585-9396. So we have Dr. Bruger back.
Yes, thank you so much for being back with us, Christian. So you were answering this idea of what does the church feel about legalizing marijuana for medical use?
Yeah, well, the legalization for medical use, there's no intrinsic ethical problem with that. If there are conditions that can only be well treated by using marijuana, then smoke away. We use much higher controlled substances like morphine and Percocet, etc., when people are in a lot of pain. So that's, if for clinical purposes, if under doctor supervision, that's another issue. But we can be fairly confident when a state garners a legal strategy to introduce a medical marijuana bill, that it's a stepping stone in that state to legalizing recreational use. Everyone knows it. This is, it's like the king has no clothes. In Colorado, the constituency that pushed for medical marijuana 2 years earlier were the exact same people who were pushing for legalization of recreational smoking. So at very least, we shouldn't be naive and think, well, let's not intervene because this is really simply for people who are suffering terribly, and why should we prevent them from doing that? Well, if it's a concerted effort in the state to change public policy, it is reasonably judged in advance to be a stepping stone to legalization. And if people in that state are concerned about there being legalization of possession and use, then they should speak up at the stage of the medical marijuana bill debates.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Our guest is Dr. Christian Bruegger. He is the J. Francis Cardinal Stafford Professor of Moral Theology at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver. Also Senior Fellow of Ethics and Director of the Fellows Program at the Culture of Life Foundation in Washington, D.C. We're talking about marijuana today. It's being legalized in many states. It has been for medical purposes, now for recreational purposes. Maybe you have a concern about the direction that this is going, as Dr. Bruegger said. Perhaps you're all in favor of it. Maybe you think, it's harmless. It's a lot. It's not as bad as heroin or crack or some of these things. 800-585-9396 is our number, and got to get to a break here in just a couple minutes. You actually anticipated my next question, Dr. Bruegger, and that was the incremental way in which our culture sort of advances things like this. But I know you're not a medical doctor. Perhaps you can address this, maybe not, but setting aside the question of legality and the potential for marijuana to truly help people battling various health issues, which we want to be in favor of that by all means if that's going to enhance somebody's quality of life. But does smoking marijuana introduce dangers to the health of the user if, say, done over a long period of time or done in large amounts? Can it lead to the use of harder, more dangerous drugs? These are questions that we have to answer as well, I think.
And they're not difficult questions to answer. Just go Google the National Institutes of Health and put in dangers of marijuana smoking. There are a truckload of problems associated with the smoking of marijuana, especially the smoking of marijuana on a regular basis. The short-term effects which are being intentionally sought by the individual, altered senses and change in mood and impaired body movement and a sense of inebriation, difficulty with thinking, memory impairment. Those are sort of the immediate things. But long-term effects have been correlated to various forms of serious mental illness, paranoia, schizophrenia. It's pretty clear that there's a correlation between smoking a lot of pot and at least the worsening of symptoms for schizophrenia. There are breathing problems and females who get pregnant, problems gestating their babies. And a study was recently done that showed if a child starts smoking marijuana around the age of 13, which is when I started smoking it when I was a kid, between that age and 38, they will, on average, lose 8 IQ points because it really affects learning and thinking and memory. So, are these, and there's virtually no benefit from it. Getting high offers virtually no benefit to our community. The one argument that'll be put forward is, well, it helps me to relax when I come home at night. Well, if you want, I'd be happy to address that question. But otherwise, it just, puts on our shoulders a whole lot of bad consequences. And up to now, our inhibitions against pot smoking, we now know, have been much too reliant upon the argument from illegality. Because now that it's no longer illegal, people are doubting all over the place. I constantly get consults from Catholics saying, well, it's not illegal anymore, so it must not be immoral, which shows that none of us were really thinking about it before and just relied upon the power of sanction from the law, but never really thought seriously about the problem itself. So this is a good opportunity for us to think about whether or not we want to be the kind of people who are smoking a whole lot of pot.
Well, Dr. Brugger, we got to get to a break here in about a minute. We did get a comment from a Facebook follower, and by the way, we're at EWTN Catholic Radio, and this listener says, I am a survivor of hepatitis C. I had dirty blood at 17 in an almost fatal head-on car wreck in 1969. I cannot sleep and I cannot take drugs, so I use marijuana for sleep only. I use certain strains in small dose to sleep. If I do not use it, I cannot hold a job, no money. There are millions like me. What about us? And we've already addressed this a little bit, but maybe you can just speak to that real quickly again before we go to the break.
Let me just say real clearly, and in this sense, I can speak for the church as well, because there are other issues of this sort the church does speak on. If this particular substance has a manifest therapeutic benefit for somebody, especially with respect to conditions that are serious, which this gentleman or this person who had the Facebook quote seems to have serious condition, then there's no problem. There's no ethical problem with that person being prescribed marijuana or the tablets of THC if necessary, or using it, although those persons will have side effects, and they, like the use of any drugs that are prescribed, they ought to know them, and it be fully informed consent. So my criticisms are not being directed towards those people. My criticisms would be directed to the analogy of a state saying we're going to use recreational Percocet use or recreational morphine use, and should we do it? So I'd speak out against that, but I certainly don't speak out against it if a person needs it for end-stage cancer therapy or pain management. So there's no ethical problem other than the basic problem of saying, how much should I use and how often should I use it and how should I be thinking about side effects.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Brugger. We're going to take a quick pause, and when we come back, if it's okay with you, we're going to go to the phones because we have almost every phone line lit up. So please, dear listeners, and when we come back from this short break, if you have an open phone line, jump in at 1-800-585-9396. We're talking about, is our country going to pot? We have Dr. Christian Brugger with us. He's a specialist or an expert in the area of moral theology. Please call in. We'll be right back.
This is Al Cresta, host of Cresta in the Afternoon, and Cresta in the Afternoon looks at all of life through the lens of Scripture and the teaching of the Catholic Church. Church teaching is the light by which we view the world, and so we'll explore everything, from abortion to Hollywood, and from the First Amendment to the United Nations, and everything in between. Following St. Paul, we're seeking transformation through the renewing of our minds. So that's Cresta in the Afternoon with me, Al Cresta, weekdays 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
It's June 6th, and on this day in 1610, St. Jane Frances de Chantal and St. Francis de Sales founded the Visitation Order of Nuns. They believed that holiness could be found in everyday life experiences and dedicated themselves to helping the sick and the poor. Also, St. Norbert died on this day in 1134. He was a worldly person but took his religious vows seriously after nearly dying. Because his fellow monks resisted reform, he started a new, stricter order that flourished across Europe.
Hey, Catholic high school and college filmmakers, want to get your work seen in over 250 million homes around the world? Then enter the Cool to be Catholic commercial contest. We're looking for original 30 and 60-second spots that focus on Catholic themes. 3 grand prize winners will get an all-expense-paid trip to the EWTN studios in Birmingham, Alabama, and a guest appearance on Life on the Rock. To find out more and to enter, go to EWTN.com/cool2becatholic.
Hello, this is Father John Paul Mary.
This is Debbie Georgiani, co-host of Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
My friends, this is Bishop Kevin Vann of the Diocese of Orange. I want to thank you very much for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on EWTN Radio. And your takes, as always, drive the program at 1-800-585-9396. Our guest today, as we talk about, is Our Country Going to Pot? It is Christian Bruger, Senior Fellow of Ethics and Director of the Fellows Program at the Culture of Life Foundation in the nation's capital. He also holds the J. Francis Cardinal Stafford Professor of Moral Theology at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver, Colorado. We're going to get to the calls. By the way, Dr. Bruger, I just wanted to clarify, make sure you knew that when I asked that follow-up at the end, I was not challenging what you had said before. I just wanted to be sure that we presented this position from this social media person so that we could get that clarity and really kind of laser focus in on the difference between when there might be a need for medical marijuana versus recreational use. So,
of course,
we're going to go to your state right now. Dr. Bruger, Marie is in Golden, Colorado, listening to EWTN Radio on Denver Catholic Radio. Hi, Marie. You're on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and Dr. Christian Bruger.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, I live in Golden, Colorado, and I just think that this legalization of the recreational marijuana was the worst possible thing that Colorado could have done. It has led to just so many issues that stem and branch from the legalization. And kids that are supposed to be a certain age to get it, they're still walking in these stores and able to obtain it. And they're laced with so many different things. They're more potent now, and just the side effects of it are just awful. So I am totally against the legalization of it.
Dr. Bruger, your thoughts on Marie's comments?
Well, hi, Marie. We're neighbors. I'm in Evergreen, and
oh, okay.
It's not only you who has this attitude. It's law enforcement as well. I have a detective who's a student of mine in Deacon program who said the amount of crimes that have gone up, including violent crimes. He came to me 2 days ago and said there was a triple homicide in Denver City, and he said it was all surrounding people from out of state coming in to get pot, and the thing went sour, and three people got shot. It just seems to me that the issues that should have been on the table were not seriously considered by our legislature. It seemed as if they had an end point in sight. It was democratically controlled at the time. They had this goal, and they pushed it through. If there was a serious question in Colorado as to whether this would advance the conditions of the common good, especially among the youth, I don't see how any responsible political leader could have come to the conclusion our state will be better off. Our citizens will be healthier, we will be more unified, we will be able to carry out the tasks of neighborliness and conscientious state projects more effectively. I don't think they had any interest in those questions. They had interest in an enormous amount of money. The tax money on marijuana is in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and that seems to me is what motivated the legislature.
Yeah.
At least I hope that was what motivated. I hope it wasn't worse motives for legalizing dangerous substances.
Yeah, and the homelessness rate has really just increased, skyrocketed as a direct result of this. And I do have a friend that her nephew is a cop in Denver. He said the same thing. The crime rate is just awful, and it's actually increased activity of the cartels from Mexico.
Yes.
So yeah, it's been awful, and kids are getting sick and overdosing. And I have a friend that's a doctor, and she sees these kids that are smoking pot that have been laced with all kinds of horrible chemicals, and they're eating these edibles that are, you eat one of these gummy bears, they don't feel the effect. Well, then they double what they're eating, and they're overdosing, and some of them dying.
Yeah, and I think people in other states who are considering the question, and of course the question is framed in its most benign sense. Why not on a Friday night come home and smoke a half a joint as a sort of sedative? We should have that right. We've had alcohol, legalized for most of the life of our country. Sort of put it in this benign. It's going to assist us. It's only going to be people who are completely trustworthy. that is a smokescreen. There are going to be some who are smoking it and who are, decent people and who aren't abusing it. But there's going to be an enormous abuse factor in any state that legalizes this. So if you're interested in avoiding that abuse factor, oppose the legalization laws. Mm-hmm. Our state didn't take it that seriously. We didn't oppose it that strongly.
Well, but Dr. Bruegger, let me ask you this question, and to Marie, because you both live in the same state. What can you do in Colorado now? What would be the next step, the next action for those to take to maybe reverse this or stop this? And so is there, and we only have about 2 minutes before the hard break we must take, but I would love to hear your answer.
Well, if we got in a governor who was resolute on overturning this, and we got a legislature that was would support him in that, then I think it could be overturned. But in the meantime, what the state is doing is sort of gradually introducing certain other kinds of restrictions and putting in smoke-free areas around schools and a variety of different sort of symptomatic limitations, so that it doesn't go as the problems don't go as widely as they're inclined to go. But once it comes in, it's very hard to undo it. We know that. We know that from laws that have brought other bad things into our country. Once they come in, it's very, very difficult to undo them. So that's why I keep addressing your listeners here. If they really don't think it's good for their state, and I can't see any reason that would justify tolerating this kind of very serious harm, then oppose it at the legislature. You better believe if you bring 300 citizens down to the Judicial Committee meeting on your own Capitol Hill and they say, hell no, we won't go, your legislators will wake up. They wake up with that kind of that kind of citizen action. It's just that we don't do it too often.
Right. That's good. Very good. Very wise words for all of us to take note of. So, Marie, thank you so much for calling in and starting off the conversation with Dr. Bruegger. You can hear that music. We're going to take that break. And when we come back, we're going to go right to Lisa in Missouri, who's been waiting so patiently. I think Lisa's going to get our Patience Award. But we're going to take that break. We're talking about, is our country going to pot? We have a great conversation. We've got Dr. Christian Bruegger with us, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
From EWTN News Nightly in Washington, D.C., I'm Catherine Seltner with an EWTN News Link. Afghanistan's president condemns the Sunday attack that killed 2 members of the National Public Radio News crew. The journalist and interpreter died in an ambush while on assignment in southern Afghanistan. Pope Francis canonizes 2 new saints. St. Elizabeth Hesselblad was a Lutheran convert who hid Jews during World War II, and St. Stanislaw Pepczynski founded the first men's religious order dedicated to the Immaculate Conception. A cloth with a drop of St. John Paul II's blood has been stolen from Germany's Cologne Cathedral. Police say a visitor noticed the relic disappeared and alerted a church usher. And today marks the 72nd anniversary of D-Day, when more than 150,000 U.S., British, and Canadian forces invaded Normandy, France, to fight Nazi Germany in World War II. I'm Catherine Seltner with your EWTN Newslink.
Here is Father Todd Carter from the Diocese of Trenton with a mercy moment.
When we think about how we have failed to love God and neighbor, we can tell ourselves that it's hopeless. We have all hurt people in our lives, and we all have regrets. That can leave us depressed and thinking that God has left us. But I'm here to tell you today that it is not hopeless. Our Lord did not die for those who were okay. He died for sinners. We can be discouraged by sin, but God always says, I have a plan. God created all things and knows all things. He made everything for a purpose. And because of that purpose, He never gives up on anyone that He loves. I can get annoyed at times and I can condemn, but I'm human and God is beyond what we can ever expect. May you learn to trust in the goodness of God this year of mercy.
This has been Father Todd Carter with a mercy moment.
We thank you so much for listening, and those of you calling, thank you for being on the line. Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our guest, Christian Bruegger. We are talking about, is our country going to pot? We have already made the distinction between when it may be ethical in terms of medical application, but it certainly is streaking its way across the country and being approved for quote-unquote recreational or personal use as well. And we have gotten a lot of thoughts from Dr. Brugger on that, and we're going to stay with your calls right now. Lisa in St. Joseph, Missouri, listening to EWTN Radio on Sirius XM 130. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the program.
Hi there.
What is your take on this?
Well, I actually recently moved to Missouri from Northern California, where it's been legal for some time. And
Lisa, we can't hear you real well. Can you speak directly into the phone?
Okay, can you hear me better?
Perfect. That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So I lived in Northern California, where it's been legal for some time. Recently retired to Missouri, and so I was able to observe some of the effects. One thing that was mentioned was that there's a big investment factor and a lot of money being made by growers in Northern California, and in those areas, the crime has begun to increase exponentially. I talked to some people that live in that area, and they're pretty alarmed by that. The idea that if somebody has an illness and needs a prescription needs to be rethought, I believe, because the percentages are probably less than 30% of people that are actually really needing it for medical purposes. The majority are recreational users, and you can smell it on the highways. There are signs that say buzz driving is drunk driving, but you can smell it in a lot of areas in Northern California as you're driving down the road, because people will smoke and drive. And it doesn't it's not like a glass of wine. It does stay in your system for quite some time. I don't know exactly how long, but more than a day. So that's a big concern. And young people especially, there are a lot of studies that have shown the effect on the brain and how it can permanently make changes. And you can Google under Science Daily and other places where the brain can have permanent changes in terms of motivation, as there's a motivation center of the brain, which is a really important part of who we are. And then, as was mentioned, the loss of IQ points, especially in a really young user that's in the preteen ages.
Well, Lisa, let's let Dr. Brugger weigh in on some of these things that you said, Doctor.
Yeah, Lisa, it's very, very interesting. You know, it was January 2014 where the legalization was phased in Colorado. There was a lot of enthusiasm leading up to the signing of the legislation. But I have not, in the last year, I have seen nothing positive from anybody in the state. Nobody seems to be enthusiastic. Denver Post, very benign and enthusiastic about the law. I see a lot of op-eds and other articles now reflecting upon some of the harms that it's bringing to Colorado. The governor who signed it into law has criticized the law several times. It's funny how we can get swept up into a kind of fad mentality, and we jump on board, and then after we get what we want, we realize that there are more problems with it than we anticipated in the first place. So police enforcement should have been at the main seat at the table in discussing this question, but the police were effectively excluded from the conversation. I volunteer at the prison. I hear nothing good from our police and law enforcement officials. They just roll their eyes when we talk about it, when I raise the issue. So there are a lot of problems. There are social and problems, physical problems, and mental problems, and financial problems. Some are gaining significantly, others are suffering. Homelessness. So it really, it's not hard to see these things in advance.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for contributing to the conversation and sharing your knowledge and your experience living in one of the states that you can. I think it's just horrific, Dr. Brugger, that you can. And I've smelt it as well when I've traveled. You can smell it on the streets, and one of the airports I flew into, you could smell it in the airport, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is what our children are being exposed to at a very early age. And so this is not all the way around, this has serious problems that are going to affect our youth from this just from the standpoint of just us accepting it as it's okay just to smell it. So Lisa, thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. We pray that you have a beautiful blessed rest of your day. Thank you, Lisa. We're going to move right along. We're going to try to get to as many as we can today. We've got a lot of action happening on Facebook and a lot of calls coming in, so Dr. Bruger, get ready. Here we go. Al, we're going to go to the other side, to the East Coast. Al in Corning, New York, listening to EWTN Radio on the Station of the Cross. Hi, Al. Welcome to Take Two.
Hi. My question is with regards to specifically the smoking of marijuana, and not necessarily, there was alluded to the effects as far as to the brain and stuff, but just as far as taking in the smoke in your lungs. So in New York State, of course, there's been a lot of effort to kind of eradicate cigarette smoking through, not allowing smoking in restaurants and, in school, within the schools, as well as, ads to try to, basically bring smoking into kind of a negative light. So I was just wondering, I would imagine anything that you smoke, you're ingesting that smoke into your lungs, there's got to be a negative impact. So what do we know as far as the negative impacts of just smoking marijuana itself?
Thanks, Al. It's a good question. I'm only a dilettante in reading about it. I have understood that the problems of breathing impairment that are associated with cigarette smoking are very similar to those that would be associated with smoking of marijuana. So too would be the secondary effects of people who are in the environment when someone else is smoking. It affects the lungs, it affects the breathing, the airwaves. Plus, of course, it has in it this heavy drug THC. So if you're in a living room, if you're a child in a living room, with parents who are smoking it in the living room and it gets fogged out, the child is going to be taking in these dangerous substances. So it's a problem.
Well, Al, is there anything else for Dr. Bruger?
No, and I guess I just think it's kind of ironic that, we have spent so much, money and energy into kind of eradicating cigarette smoking, but we kind of don't look at marijuana smoking. We kind of look at it, I guess, in a different light. And again, as kind of was alluded to earlier, it's been on the premise of legality, opposed to maybe some of the health issues related to it.
Mm.
Yeah, we get swept up in conversations, and as I said earlier, I used the word fad, a kind of fadism. There are many things, the use of formula for babies, the Dr. Spock routine back in the 1950s. Formula was going to, make babies stronger and healthier, and we ditched out breastfeeding. I'm part of that generation that were ditched on breastfeeding. And we didn't do our due diligence, and it turned out that breastfeeding is much, much more valuable for baby development. And we pitched out marriage, and we introduced no-fault divorce because we thought this is finally going to, make marital conflict situations go away. And then 30 years later, the literature on divorce, everyone who writes on it, even defenders of divorce, say divorce is really bad for the children. There's no such thing as an amicable divorce. So we're rushing headlong into this, saying, oh, this is so good, and we've had it around, and we can't control, and people will continue to do it, therefore we must legalize it. But in 20 or 30 years, we're going to have mountains of data. We already have lots of data, but that's going to just increase, and we're going to then start backpedaling, like we did with smoking, which, remember when I'm 51 years old. I remember when I was a kid, the television commercials made smoking out to be the most urbane and healthy and, body is beautiful kind of thing you could do. And now there's nothing good we can say about smoking cigarettes. The same thing is going to happen, and may I predict worse, because pot smoking is not just the problem of tar in your body, but it's putting in THC, an addictive substance. So let's be wise before we make these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Al, thank you very much for joining us from Corning, New York on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Our country is going to pot. That is our conversation today. What's your take on this, dear listener? We have time to get you on the program. Legal in many states. It was first introduced for medical use, and we've already made the point on this program. That is not an unethical application of marijuana if a doctor prescribes that for legitimate medical purposes. But we're talking primarily about the personal or recreational use, the dangers of that, the easy access for kids and so forth. 1-800-585-9396. Just a quick comment on the many things that you mentioned there, Dr. Brugger. It's the horses there are a lot of horses that have romped out of the barn at this point. And finding that horse and corralling it back in seems almost impossible, as you've made the point here on the program today. So, again, 1-800-585-9396. We're going to go to Norman in Massachusetts, listening to EWTN radio in the beautiful state of Mass. Hello, Norman. You've got a take on this. What's on your mind?
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. Well, I got a take on it because I'm an older gentleman. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, so it was, just really coming out and just having it around me a lot. And I quit at the age of 22, but I've seen so many things. They used to have studies back then, geez, what can marijuana do to you? And I'm thinking, what, are they crazy? What do they think I smoke it for? Because it gets me high. It gets me away from reality. You get lack motivation. You have brain fog, food cravings. There's just so many things that I did wrong. I have two lovely daughters that I raised and told them, stay away from drugs, stay away from pot. I found out recently when my oldest daughter was smoking it through the years, and I didn't know that. But she told me that a couple of years ago she quit, and her mind is just so much clearer now. She sees things better, and I wouldn't want my grandkids to be around. I don't want my grandkids to be doing this. And I know a lot of my friends would be pretty irritated the view I take on it, but I just don't think it's right. I just don't think we need a country of brain-fogged people, and that's what it does to you. I've did it for many years. I haven't done it for many years now, but when I was younger, it's just like, it's not a healthy thing in all aspects, so I just, Massachusetts is going to be looking at this, I guess, and it's probably going to go through because we're so liberal in this state, but I am so against it. It's just unbelievable what it does to you.
I agree with you, Norman. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I smoked a truckload of marijuana, and those were the most passive years of my life. Depression and other mood disorders. I was not pursuing anything that would set me up to be a good citizen or a good father. When I would smoke marijuana, my resolve, I was a Christian kid, I believe I had faith, but even my resolutions to be faithful to Jesus when I was high, I would compromise on them. There were all sorts of behavioral and physical and mental effects. And so people like you, Norman, and me who have done it and who did it a lot, and we witnessed both the culture in which we did it and we witnessed the effects upon ourselves and those who were close to us, we need to speak out and say, look, in large dosages, this is really bad. Some people might come back and say, well, what about in small dosages? Well, that, you can put a small dosage of arsenic in your body and it not kill you. That's true. But why put small dosages of things in your body that are really bad for you and that have a culture surrounding it that really its values are for the most part, incompatible with the values of our Catholic faith and our love for Christ?
Yeah. One thing I want to add, though, Norman, you made the comment, you said just the way the state that you live in, it's probably going to go in that direction. I hope you heard the beginning of the show when Dr. Brugger was really kind of putting a challenge out there to all of us to really step up and make sure that we make our voices known when things are going to get passed in the legislature. I think that's a very important thing to take away from this conversation of the show, is that we can't sit passively by and watch things be passed in front of us so that it does affect our children. The thought of having our children just be able to smell it in airports and on the streets and in restaurants and everywhere they go, as it's just, oh, that's just the way it is. That's really troubling. So I would just echo what Dr. Brugger said, and just really, tell your story more in your state and get people on the same page as you, and maybe have your voices be heard. Would that be safe to do, Dr. Brugger, for Norman?
Absolutely. Many things are predictable because we know dynamics We know how popular opinion is going, which direction the wind's blowing, and Massachusetts is a liberal state, and so it's predictable that it will pass. But I want to say this really strongly. Nothing is inevitable. We have free will. Humans bring things into existence, and humans bring them out of existence. And so if you get enough concerned citizens around and you bring them down to the legislative conversation, and you say, I have a lot of different people. I bet there's a bunch of folks who are still politically liberal, but who were pot smokers when they were young, and they say, we don't want this in our children's playgrounds, and we don't want it in our high schools, and we don't want at every corner in our city to have pot dispensaries. I mean, they're all over the place in Denver. You can't turn your eyes without seeing a pot dispensary in certain parts of town. It really is offensive to people who have different values, who think it's the wrong thing. So I just, it's not easy to garner public opinion on an issue in which you'll probably be the minority, but it can do a whole lot of good, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who think like you, but they might think, it's inevitable, so there's nothing I can do. Nothing is inevitable, because humans have free will.
All right, thank you, Norman, for the phone call. We're going to stay with your calls. A lot of social media. I would love to. Harry on our Facebook page said a lot of what Dr. Brugger has said. No for recreational use. I live in a state that has this for that purpose, and it is a disaster, in my opinion. The complexities it adds to society, government, commerce, child and animal safety, road safety, police enforcement, etc., are hushed by the media and its supporters. So accountability is new, and Harry goes on to say more than that. But Harry, thanks for your take on EWTN Catholic Radio Facebook page. Next, we're going to go to Cal, listening in Manhattan, Kansas, to EWTN Radio on the Sword of St. George. Cal, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our guest, Dr. Christian Brugger.
Hi, yes, thank you for having me.
Cat, I'm sorry, I said Cal, it's Cat. Sorry about that.
I am just calling to make a comment. I'm a mother of 6, and I live in Kansas, right next to Colorado. I live near a college town, and the culture war of this drug war is so accessible and powerful right now that it's really knocking me as a parent off of my feet. And drugs is just a part of it, but what I'm really concerned about is that I have a support system behind me that's strong enough to contradict this ongoing progression of legalized marijuana and other things. And I'm finding that the church, and hoping and praying that the church will start to recognize that we have to step up our game in terms of youth group participation. There's not a lot of formation here and talking about these things. Smaller circles, yes, but I really do feel like we really have to strengthen and unify our voices in terms of all of these things that are affecting our youth. I have four teenagers and 4 adolescents, and I have one daughter living in Colorado, and her response is that she just does not see the problem. Initially, she was, anti-drug, but now that she's kind of, going on her own in her 20s and in the college, scene, she's, despite our faith formation, which was very strong, we homeschooled our children in terms of all of that, and she really knows her catechism, but she's just getting sucked in with this chronic message, and really does feel powerless as a parent, or at least a gamble.
Your comments are very good, and I'd like to make a couple brief points. One is this is most dangerous for our children, because our children are so influenceable by popular opinion, and they haven't had experience of years of doing certain things and being able to calculate the harms that came out in their lives. And so our children, in many ways, even children up until 18, 19, 20, need to be protected from the mentality which says this is benign. So it's unfair to children to have them have to establish the arguments against this. And the adults who have the experience, who have the data, we should be the ones who are speaking up. And then when our children need to have reasons given to them, and we ought to always give the reasons why the church teaches what it teaches, or if we're coming down with a conclusion that we believe is consistent with Catholic teaching, we give the why behind it. Although the Bible and church teaching doesn't have anything particular to say about pot smoking, the scriptures have a lot to say about inebriation, about drunkards. And I think all of them, I've gone through them, I've done scripture studies, they are directly applicable to folks who are smoking pot recreational in order to get high. And so, do a Bible study in your parish on inebriation, and it talks about, that the drunkards will be unprepared when Jesus comes again, that they won't be able to keep their commitments to fidelity. The drunkards are the ones who are licentious, and they treat women poorly, and so on. The list of kinds of vices that arise that are associated with drunkenness. And that's what pot is for. Pot, anyone who compares pot with alcohol is just failing to look at the disanalogies between pot and alcohol. You can drink alcohol for a whole lot of reasons other than to get yourself drunk. But you can't smoke marijuana. Can't practically. I mean, you can't. Theoretically, we can say there are people out there who do it, but you can't practically smoke it without getting high. It's a very different kind of substance. The THC goes from the lungs into the blood system to the brain, and even a few puffs of a joint, especially with the very powerful strength of marijuana today, it's going to make you inebriated. So if you don't want to get inebriated, you don't smoke pot. But you certainly can have a glass of wine when you come home from work, because you can differentiate between the sedative effect, it calms my nerves, and the drunken effect. So I think we should address marijuana smoking as a culture of drunkenness, a culture of inebriation. And what's wrong with a culture of drunkenness and inebriation? It leads to irresponsibility. It leads to the losing one's job. It leads to homelessness. It leads to broken relationships. It leads to physical problems and mental problems. All of these, we have data correlating pot smoking with all of these things, which is precisely what we see with alcohol abuse. And I don't think anyone can really have a habit of pot smoking without it being abuse, pot smoking abuse. I mean, I've had people come to me, well, couldn't I come home on a Friday night and have a joint just the way you come home and have a glass of white wine? And I said, look, we're splitting hairs here. If you came home and lit a joint and took a half a puff and then put it out, maybe you could induce in yourself a kind of calmness, a pacification that didn't include inebriation. But is that what you're talking about? No, you're saying come home and have a joint. But you smoke a whole joint, you smoke a whole bowl, you smoke a few bowls in the bong, you're inebriated. It's like coming home and drinking 6 bottles of beer or drinking 3 martinis. It's just counterfactual to say that people are smoking marijuana merely to have the kind of pacifying effect that a single glass of white wine will give you on a Friday night. If that's all it was, then I don't think there'd be a debate, because that's not a problem. The problem is getting high.
Right.
It's bad for you. It's bad for the community. It's bad for children. It's bad for social disorder. It's bad for neighborhoods. It's bad for schools.
Yep. Well, Kat, we want to thank you, Dr. Berger. That was huge. And Kat, thank you so much for your contribution. I hope youth ministers are listening all around the country to the show. They could really use it in the classroom. We want to very quickly get to Michael, because we wanted to talk about gateway drug, that the pot is a gateway drug. Michael, you have like about 15 seconds. I'm so sorry, but we wanted to get to you. Welcome.
Thank you. I just want to tell my quick story. My son at 14 started with marijuana. By the time he was 19, he had quit marijuana and unfortunately got into opiate pain prescription pills. Then he got into heroin. And this past March, he did an armed robbery, and now he's facing multiple counts of felonies here in Wisconsin. I want to tell you that thank God that you're speaking the truth about marijuana and drugs. They're going to destroy this country. We are a
Dr. Berger, excuse me, Michael. Forgive me, Michael. We got Dr. Berger. We got about 20 seconds for a reply.
Got it. The story is told over and over and over again. And the story now in the state of Colorado is being doubled, tripled, quintupled, because we've made it legal. We've made the purchasing and use of marijuana legal, and those same situations are going to be seen more and more in our country. And I think we ought to oppose legalization measures, even if it makes us look square and behind the times and behind history. You know, to hell with all of those remarks. This is not good for our children, and it's not inevitable that pot's going to become legal throughout our country.
Dr. Bruger, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us here on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Tomorrow, our topic, proudly wearing your faith. Do others know that you're a Christian when they are around you? We'll talk about that. God bless.